It's your time for Chai with Nanice. Get ready for substance, clarity, change, and especially empowerment. Get ready to turn over stones, uncover stories, and get to the heart of the matter in every area of your life. Any mood runs, any emotion flies, and your dreams are within your grasp. There are no limits or boundaries, and your comfort zone is out of reach, yet it's the safest place you will ever be. Come in, sit down, and have some chai with Nanice.
To Chai with Nanice. I'm Nanice. I know so many of you are on the spiritual path, and we've done many, many shows in the past about spirituality. Well, today we're going to be talking about how to bring your spiritual self to everyday life. Now, let's face it, so many of us, we have real lives, and we have children and jobs, and, we have things to deal with in the everyday world. And especially if you're in the LA area, you have to deal with traffic, and that in itself can be a challenge. So how do you bring your spiritual self to everyday life? How do you wake up in the morning and get out of bed with your God self? How do you go through your life when people may be antagonistic or not so friendly and still arrive in your true self? How do you feel connected to the divine? And how do you live the divine in everyday chaos? So today I'd like you to sit back and maybe let go of some of your beliefs of what spirituality means and what it doesn't mean, and just to try on some new concepts, some new ideas. What does it mean to be spiritual today? And it might be very different than you were brought up with. It might be very different than you've ever thought of before. What I hope that you get from today's show is a sense of wholeness, a sense of, well, you know what? You really are exactly where you need to be, and there's nothing different that you have to do, that your life is perfect, and you have essentially everything that you need in order to express your divine spiritual self in everyday life, no matter what is happening. Doesn't that sound good? And in that is the freedom. So many of us, go and we try to find ways to change our lives, and we try to find ways to manage the chaos. And, many of us have taken, stress reducing classes, and we go to the gym and, all these things to try to, pat life down, pat our anxiety down. But maybe there's a simpler answer. Maybe the answer is inside of you all along. And maybe all it takes is a new breath and a new sense of awareness and a new sense of self. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say a new sense of self, because there's nothing new about your true self. Your true self is and has always been who you really are. So say hello to your true self, and I would like to introduce you to my amazing guest today. She's been on the show before, and I'm really excited to have her back, Mukti, and she is the associate teacher of the Open Gate Sangha, founded in 1999 with her husband and teacher Adashanti. And her own teaching, Mukti, points audiences back to their natural state of wholeness or undivided consciousness. She's licensed in acupuncture and certified to teach Hatha Yoga. She has a love of the whole of experience and form, as well as the formless. Mukti offers public teachings, including retreats all over the country, including California, as well as offers private meetings by phone or in person in San Jose. Mukti, thank you so much for having chai with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Nanice. Wonderful to be back.
Thank you. I loved the show that we did a few months ago. It was an awesome show, and I got such incredible response from it. And you are just a breath of fresh air and a light in this world, and I so loving spending time with you.
It's my pleasure, and it's also a real treat to know that while we're sharing, that there's a whole host of folks out there listening who are part of this too. So.
Absolutely.
So welcome
Absolutely.
to all of you out there.
I've said on the show many times that the listeners, they make up the show too, that even if they're not listening live, even if they're listening to an archive, that energy at any time affects the show and influences the show, and that their energy is important and part of the creation process. So thank you for reminding us all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
thank you. Thank you. So what is your view on this concept of everyday spirituality?
Well, this is a fantastic question, and it's in a sense a rather larger, far-reaching question.
Yes.
So let me maybe begin to approach it through just following a strand of a greater fabric. I think that one of the most fascinating ways to look at spirituality in everyday life is to see where the two, let's say, I think one of the phrases you might have used earlier in your introduction was how to bring spirit or your spiritual self into everyday life. And I think a really interesting way to look at it is to see how the two are not separate, and perhaps even to see that the two are one and the same.
Yes.
And I think that if that is explored, it could really be revolutionary to this question or topic you're bringing forward. I think it's often that there's a tendency, whether it's through how we've been raised or how we've been informed, there can be a tendency to think of spirit as some part of ourselves, as opposed to actually finding out what it is that we are, and or finding out, for that matter, a question could be asked like, what is spirit? And to really discover that in a very full way can be quite surprising, for at least in my own experience and in everyone I've ever talked to who's really realized this in a very full and rich way. They're amazed to find that it's not so much like there's a piece of God or spirit in us, but that spirit is actually what we are.
Yes.
And in our full-blown human expression, in the nitty-gritty of life, in all of the complex, textures of pleasant experiences and not so pleasant experiences, but that spirit is living life through this vehicle that we are, to experience the whole thing, and not just some pleasant experiences that are transcendent and kind of up and out away from this world, but really actually right down and in here into this expressing through our very human nature.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we can't help but be spirit, that we are the spiritual self, and that it's the spiritual self who's having this experience, and not some human facet of the spiritual self, but actually the spiritual self, that you can't get away from your spiritual self. It's like you can run, but you can't hide, because your spiritual self is who you really are.
Yeah, and also along those lines, that it's our mind that kind of compartmentalizes these concepts of there's me and then there's spirit, or there's me and then there's life, as though we are not life or we are not spirit, but that's something we're trying to attain, or that's something other. So I think that whole concept, if you look at it really closely, you can see, my mind is holding this in a certain way, and would it be possible to actually put to table that whole idea and to actually enter the mystery of ourselves, or of any notion that we have of God or spirit, like you said earlier, in a fresh way, where we're setting aside our beliefs about it and really looking to our own direct experience.
So that it's not what I would call a second-hand God, that we're having a direct experience of the divine, that we're having this direct experience of our true selves, and not getting it as a byproduct of something or someone else.
Yes. Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah. Yeah. And when the orientation is our experience of our spirituality completely depends on this orientation that I'm talking about, or that you're also sharing. You know, it can be quite different. You know, in a paradigm where God is out there, or even life is out there, and I need to manage it. There's this whole sort of subject-object relationship that gets reinforced, and it can create a great sense of separateness, a feeling of separateness inside, that we're separate from God, just through our own belief that we continue to reinforce that tells us that.
And it's that separateness that causes the fear and the pain, and if we look closely, we're likely to see that it's that sense of separateness that has really caused all perceived and unperceived problems on this planet and in individual lives. And that to be separate, there has to be conflict or friction in one way or another.
Yes, yeah. And that's why this question is so vital, right?
Yes.
You know, because it, without looking into it more deeply, it affects our whole world. You know.
That the same person one morning can wake up and you know, wake up into a belief or a mind that says, "Oh, I'm separate," and go through life acting like they're separate and have one particular type of day, and that same person can wake up the next day with the realization of, "Oh, there's nothing separate, that everything is me, that God is me, and that the life that I experience is me, that everything is me," and have the same exact events happen as the day before and have completely different experience of those events. As a result, a completely different experience of life and of themselves.
Absolutely. And for some listeners, this may be very confusing because, you know, there's this sense of, hey, clearly I'm you, I'm me and you're you, or, you know, clearly we're different, or clearly there is individuation and there is a kind of a maybe not necessarily we would use the word separateness, but there's it's not as though, you know, the richness of life feels like everything's just one big, you know, vanilla blob or something. And so it's
like that.
Yeah, so it's a paradox.
Yes.
But that paradox is held very, very easily in the mystery of being. It doesn't work like the mind that wants to kind of box everything up, line it up, get it all neatly in order in a logical fashion.
Yeah. A few months ago, I fell in love with the concept of separation, which I had always thought of separation as this, you know, like, oh, we need to, you know, separation is, that's, you know, undesirable. And we need just to move always towards oneness. Oneness is the goal or the key. And a few months ago, I had this huge epiphany about separation, and that without separation, we wouldn't have a human experience. That in order for us to experience life, in order for us to experience each other, in order for us to experience a flower, or, you know, the taste of vanilla ice cream, or, you know, the smell of a new baby, or whatever, that we needed to have separation. That you know, that this oneness cannot truly work. Oneness in its pure essence of oneness is just experiencing oneness. In order for that oneness to experience everything, this separation happens, and it moves away from oneness in the separation. And in that moment, I had this just amazing gratitude for separation. And it of course, it came from this place of oneness, you know, so it's like, so in this place of oneness, I'm experiencing this enormous gratitude for separation, and just what a gift it is, because without separation, we wouldn't experience, or we wouldn't have life as we do.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing how it can just be like just a little, almost like a little shift, or like a pop in our perception, in your perception when that dawned. You know, when that insight really hit you, that gratitude really hit you, it's just a slight tweak
Yes.
in how you're perceiving things. And then there might be just like another slight tweak that where the sense of separate or oneness without referring to either at all,
mm-hmm.
when all the reference
mm-hmm.
points fall, where there's no conclusion there, but if I had to give it a wording, there's this sense that, there's literal separateness is oneness. Oneness is separateness.
Mm-hmm.
There really is. There's no reference point to make them other than each other.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like they're blooming. They're blooming out of each other. That they both exist simultaneously. Then, of course, making them one. If they're both existing simultaneously.
Yeah, it can feel that way in the sense that sometimes, like maybe an example of that would be a feeling where, oh my gosh, this is just appearing out of,
mm-hmm.
like, from nowhere. Like,
mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, whatever it is we're looking at or we're feeling. Yes. I mean, you take even just a thought. It's like, well, where did that come from?
Yes.
And, it's to some people it may not be an interesting question, but to other person it really captures their imagination. And they're like,
mm-hmm.
wow, where did that question come from? And one person might say it came from nowhere, and one person might just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And in that place of not knowing, there's a whole different experience of life. In that willingness to not know.
Yeah.
Or not have it all sewn up.
Yeah. As soon as we know, we've limited our experience.
Yeah. And in a sense, we've, well, this may be going a little bit too far, but...
That's okay, let's go.
Okay, but let's just explore it. You kind of push the boundary.
Totally.
And we can always come back.
Yeah, let's push the boundary, yeah.
Right. But in a sense, like you can feel how when you sew everything up and
mm-hmm.
it kind of deadens the sense of mystery
mm-hmm.
that so, like, sparkles and is alive,
mm-hmm.
that's inherent within us as individuals, within us as life itself. When it's all, sometimes there can be that feeling inside when, like, I know, like, the whole deal. It kind of robs us of that kind of potential possibility of the moment,
Right.
Yeah. The aliveness of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in layman's terms, so to speak, it's like as soon as I know something. This is the example that pops into my mind. So my neighbor comes out, and this is just a metaphor, not particularly my neighbor. Just so if you're my neighbor listening to the show, I'm not talking about you. So my neighbor comes out. And I think to myself, oh, I know him. I know all about him. This kind of limits my experience of him. And if he comes out and I'm like, oh, I don't know him. Like I wonder who he really is without putting any parameters of I know him. And it could be I know him and, he's not a very nice neighbor, or I know him and even if it's I know him and he's a great neighbor, I've still put a perimeter around him. I've still put a boundary. But if I every time I see him in the morning and I just think I don't know him and I wonder who he is, then suddenly there's this expansion that happens, and not just for me and not just for him, but for life in itself, by approaching him as I don't know who he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And wouldn't you say that's true for everything?
How so?
So this state of not knowing, that in the knowing we limit things, and in the not knowing we allow things to expand, and maybe even that this is part of the creation process. Like the not knowing is part of the creation process because it allows for there's no boundaries and it allows for more possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly could find myself saying that. There may be one other ingredient to add too, is that it has to do with really discovering the nature of reality. So it's almost like internally we can do exercises where we can feel like, even just like through a statement like, I know my neighbor, he's this guy, and yesterday he did this, and this is what he does, or whatever. And then there can be like almost like another stance or way of being that we try on, and it's like, who's my neighbor? Like, wow. I mean, you just open the mystery of who he is, right? And this is what I hear you describing, is there's this way that we can try things on. And then there's another way of maybe approaching it where we're really interested in life as it is.
Yes.
And it may seem the same as opening to the mystery of life, but it's just slightly a tweak different, meaning, see if I can pull this off, kind of, because it's something I'm feeling in the conversation.
Yes.
But to give it words, so not even to know that people, to not even like assert that they're a mystery, or not even to want to experience them in a mysterious way, but to actually learn the real reality of what's happening. It's almost like a greater unknowing that is it's just really it's rooted in a sense of ordinariness because you want to know what's real.
Yes.
And it could be, something lovely and mysterious and what would sort of sparkle with a sense of presence or something like that. Or it could just be like, I mean, this is totally ridiculous, but wow, he's got like snot dripping off his nose.
Again, if you're my neighbor, we're not talking about you.
right, exactly. And the lights of the sunlight's catching it, and or whatever it is, it's like a mystery that's not out there or all dazzling and yummy. It's and it's not necessarily hideous and gross. It's just what it is in the given moment. And it can be it comes, I think that perspective comes from a sense of a kind, often from a kind of stillness inside where a lot of our day can be, and this really comes back to your question about what is spirit in everyday life.
Yes.
Often in our everyday life, there's this sense of referencing in our mind and in our activities and who we relate to, how we relate to people in a way that's like familiar and maybe automatic, or perhaps it's filled with a lot of assumptions or conclusions, and there's this kind of rallying that happens in the movements of mind in our whole body and mind that seek for familiarity and reference points so that we can kind of know who we are in any given moment. But when there's perhaps an interest in really learning, where do these movements come from? Where does thought come from? Where do I come from?
Yes.
In the sense of myself as a thinking being, a feeling being. It's like, where does all that arise from? And when there's a returning to the very source from which all of our experiences arises, then there's a direct knowledge of our of what it is that we are, who it is that's living this everyday life. Mm-hmm. And I think that knowing of who it is that's living this everyday life that often comes about through a willingness to stop and be still, gives a whole different experience of life in any given moment.
I love that. I love that. Just stopping and being still.
Yeah, and then life reveals itself to us on its kind of like on its own terms. Mm-hmm. Not through like a specific lens of like, okay, this is my spiritual lens, or my lens of looking from mystery, or this is my, whatever it is, like functional mind lens or ordinary, human lens or whatever, but just life, just, unabridged life.
Yeah. It seems to me that for the most part, for many people, I'm sure that a lot of people listening today would agree with this, that if they think about it, and that's your invitation to think about it, that we experience life through the stories that we tell about life, that we have all these stories about ourselves and about life and about, what might or might not happen today, or what I want or what I don't want to have happen today, or, about my neighbor, about my son, about, my mother. And these stories we keep, the stories almost become like this template that dictates one day after the other, after the other, after the other. And then before we know it, we've got, this long story that has created a lifetime. And it seems to me that these stories actually keep us away from both that grand mystery of what is, who am I, and also the mystery of what's even ordinary and real, that these stories actually create the separation and keep us from these greater truths that we're exploring and expressing today. And so, one of the things that I've learned to do when I wake up in the morning is before I even get out of bed, is I give up the story, like whatever story that I might have had about the day ahead, I just give it up. I give it up to the divine, and and then I get out of bed, literally approaching each moment as if it's a moment unto itself without the entire story. And it's hard to put into words. I know that without the story, the moment, and it can be the most ordinary, quote unquote, moment, which there's no ordinary moments, they're all extraordinary, but for the sake of this context, it could be the most ordinary moment, and it is so alive and so rich without my story attached to it. And as soon as I have any kind of story, it almost feels like there's a constriction, or everything's kind of contracting and closing in, and I don't necessarily mean in a way that one would be aware of, but in comparison to without the story, there's just this expansion, and it's really the experience of that oneness. And so it's like, so with the story, there's the separation, and without the story, there's this expanded moment that really is this oneness. This oneness that's dancing, and this oneness that's alive, and this oneness that is continuous without borders or separations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's like a very kind of practical thing that you do in the morning in terms of like practical spirituality, right? When you start the day in that way. Yeah. So this is like kind of one big piece of this topic of, how to, what is, living spirit in everyday life. And one of it could look like, a real definite, if you want to call it a practice or an intention or exercise or whatever that you start the day with.
Mm-hmm.
Another might be where, kind of what we were talking about earlier in the show, which is more like, who am I that's functioning in this everyday life, So there's sort of what we do, and then there's, what's doing it kind of thing. And those are two pieces that could kind of be two broad subtopics of the overarching topic you're bringing forward today. Yes.
Yes.
And I think in a sense, spirituality can often be almost on two tracks like that. There might be some track of, what am I, what is my practice?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that I'm drawn to do that makes that sense of spirit feel alive in me, or that brings harmony to my relationships, or whatever it is, whichever part of spirituality, given listeners interested in. And then maybe a whole other track might be, okay, there's what I do, but what about what's doing it?
Yes.
And
yes.
Then there might be another track, like, what am I? Or what is spirit?
Yes, and maybe even the tract of where there's not even a question, where there's the questions don't even exist, and landing you right there in the moment without the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the purpose of a lot of great questions, in classical spirituality, in especially in a lot of Eastern traditions, probably also in Christianity. Take like the Psalm, "Be still and know that I am God." Mm-hmm. That's not a question, but I guess the feeling of what you just said, how I felt it in me, was just more of a sense of being, just simply being.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to questions.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of spiritual pointers throughout history that certainly point to that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's what we are, what we do, and this beingness that in a sense is both.
Yes. Yes. And the questions, would you say the point of any question is to really to move into that stillness, to move into that beingness where there are no questions, that the questions are the path rather than the destination?
That's a great question, because I think, I guess, at least in my world, the questions are called like inquiry practice. Mm-hmm. And I think that those can be at different levels. I was using the word tracks. They almost can be on different tracks. Certainly a question like, what am I? Or like a classic Zen question, like, what was your face before your parents were born?
Mm-hmm.
These are questions to bring you right to the brink of any mind's and any logical mind's understanding.
Yes.
To force you beyond the boundaries of mind, straight into the unknown, and allow the question to deliver you into that unknown mystery of being.
Mm.
So that's certainly that kind of question is designed for just what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
There may be another kind of inquiry practice that's just on a totally different level, like like you're using an example of your neighbor. You come out and you're talking to your neighbor, and there may be some interaction, and you just sense that the way the communication's going, it doesn't feel harmonious or skillful or whatever, and there may be an inquiry that, let's say, drops you into your heart or something. Like, what would my heart want to say in this moment about this situation? Or
Yes.
And it may, deliver you to like a very particular way of moving and being and functioning that may not feel as quiet as when your mind kind of stops with the first kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Or a question might be something like, you had an interaction with a neighbor, and you have, like you've had Byron Katie on your show, like she has some wonderful questions, like, let's just say you have the thought, like, my neighbor shouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might have an inquiry practice that says, like, is it true that the neighbor shouldn't have done that? And part of that question may deliver you to that kind of unknown place of simply being. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe on one level, I should say, not part of it, but on one level. But on another level, it may deliver you into, like, the mind's kind of gaining a different perspective or context for the exchange that you had with your neighbor. And it really helps the mind kind of reshape its patterns of how it's concluding things. And so, the inquiry can be at all different kinds of levels, and certain questions are definitely in spirituality designed to kind of deliver one into a sense of beingness. Right. But other questions may be a little bit more pragmatic in the sense of a given, like, conditioned thought pattern that may be causing suffering or something.
Right. Yes. But I love this concept of inquiry and questions because, I've coached people for many years, and one thing that I've discovered over the years is that you can tell exactly where someone is in their life according to the questions that they ask themselves. And we don't even realize the questions that we ask ourselves. And many people, ask themselves questions like, well, why does this keep happening to me? Or, why doesn't anybody love me? Or why is everybody mean to me? Or, and you ask those questions, and the mind has to come up with reasons why. So and those would be problems, and those would be, of a lower vibration, so to speak. And so the concept of really being conscious in the inquiry, conscious in the questions that we ask, can absolutely change someone's life immediately.
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
And I love what you said about. Go ahead. We're both saying the same thing. I love what you said
about like where you can tell where somebody's at.
Yeah.
And I had this thought that was kind of funny. It bridges with what you're saying, but it's slightly different arena. But it also kind of parallels, like, you have a new grandchild, right? Is it granddaughter?
Yes. No,
granddaughter.
Boy,
okay, so
grandson.
Excuse me, grandson. Okay, great.
Yes.
So I imagine he's not yet at this age, but it'll be interesting as he gets older, and I'm sure you remember this with your own child or children, that there's those questions, like, the why, why. That's like a very toddler stage, right?
Yes.
And then there's other questions that come later, like whatever, like how does this work, or, more. But it's not always all the whys. Mm-hmm. And so not only in the spiritual path can you tell like where a person's at in their development by what questions they're asking, but even just like in human development, there's like all those different stages of the kind of questions that one asks, and it may be somewhere way down the line in a human life where they ask a question that would seem logical to ask at the beginning, which is something like, who is this that's living this life? Or what am I?
Yes.
And
yes.
And you could call that a spiritual question, but it does. I mean, this is where the whole line of just, this tendency to kind of like delineate between life and spiritual life, that whole delineation just kind of falls away at a certain point when,
yes,
you're asking a question like that. It's not even a particularly necessarily spiritual question. It's just a very nuts and bolts question.
Yes. Yes, beautifully said. It's interesting that you bring up my grandson. By the way, his name is Alta, and I was there when he was born, and for the weeks and even couple of months after his birth, he was not a happy little baby. And I could look at him and look into his eyes, and what I saw was this wise being who somehow found himself in this tiny little miserable baby's body. And I would just imagine that he was thinking, oh, why did I choose this? Wait a second. Wait, I changed my mind. Wait, why would I choose to be in this body of limitation? And you could see it. You could see his eyes, they were so awake, and he was so miserable. And what began to happen is I could see it. Almost day by day, I could see it, that he started to forget. That he would forget, and he would forget. And finally, like now, so he's almost 8 months old now, and he's the happiest baby. He's so happy. He has no memory of who he really is. He's loved by mommy and daddy and grandma and, everybody. And he's as happy as could be because he doesn't remember. And so I thought to myself, wow, boy, it's a really good thing to forget. It's a really, really good thing to forget. And so it's like I kind of like the separation thing, something like I thought, oh, it's separation's bad or forgetfulness is bad. I'm like, oh, this is a good thing. This is a good thing. And cause then he gets now to wake up and remember, but with the sense of maturity. And I think that's a key piece, because I love what you said about, that we can measure developmental stages according to the questions. And so, as he gets older, he will be more mature to ask the question. And no, better yet, he'll be more mature to remember who he really is, the greater truth of who he is, because he'll have the maturity to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think somehow this is true for us too, individually and collectively, that it really does take a sense of maturity to start to really not just ask the questions, but to get deeper understandings that bring us back to a greater truth of who we are.
Yeah. I'm in my 40s, and I have a lot of my peers are kind of in this midlife realm, and we're kind of talking about questions and stages and maturation and stuff, and it's kind of an interesting time just listening to even people I've known since school days and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's just this kind of general theme of kind of away from like, why has kind of like, it maybe begins with questions like, why hasn't my life turned out like I envisioned it, or exactly like I planned it, or, and it begins to shift into this, like, maybe a stage of just, letting oneself be disappointed, and then this willingness to hopefully, to actually experience life as it is.
Yes.
Just as it's given, just as it shows up, and it's it feels like a real kind of developmental stage inside, and kind of along with that can be this sort of theme of kind of away from any vestiges of like, why did I come here, to I am here.
Yes.
And let's get on with the business of living this life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all those kind of themes, right down to like the theme of like, maybe not being the person that you wish you could be, but actually beginning to accept that you are what you are, and
right,
and you kind of learning how to express that and really live that. Mm-hmm. And but it's all like developmental things, that we kind of, at least in my own mind, sometimes I might like more quickly put developmental stuff, in earlier years, but it's mm-hmm. fascinating how it continues and continues.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mukti, for being on the show today. That went really quick, didn't it? Because it went really quick for me.
Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it.
I know.
Hope we did justice to the topic.
I think so. Yes, absolutely. You are so beautiful and so brilliant, and wow, I really appreciate your time and energy and sharing it with me and with all our listeners today. And is there a place that they can get in touch with you and find out more about your work? And I think you have an event going on in the LA area too that you'd like to share as well.
Yes. And just before I mention, I just want to thank you as well, Nanice. It's just a pleasure to be in your gracious hospitality. And to just hear, I'm always amazed, what'll come forth in the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks again for letting me mention this too.
Please.
I'll be teaching in Tustin, California, which is in Southern California, this coming Friday evening from 7 to 9. I'll give a talk and open things up to one-on-one dialogue there. From 7 to 9 at Unity of Tustin Church. Their website is unitytustin, TUSTIN.org. And then the following Saturday, I'll also be at Unity of Tustin offering a one-day silent retreat from 9:30 to 5:30, which will be a combination of some talks where, of course, I won't be silent at that moment, but I'll be giving some talks and talks. But silent meditation and some silent break time, and some qigong exercise to give some balance to all the sitting. And then, if people would like to find out,
and that's the 6th and 7th. Is that right? Because people will listen to this in archives as well. Yes. So August 6th and 7th, 2010. Yes. Okay. Awesome.
Yes, at Unity of Tustin, and that's unitytustin.org. And then the website to find out more about the rest of my calendar and for some free downloads to listen to, or actually one of them's our last interview together. Awesome. That's at www.muktisource.org. That's MUKTISOURCE.org. So,
thank you so much, and I know we'll do this again in the near future because I love having you on the show, and it always enriches me. So thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. It's my pleasure.
My pleasure. You have a beautiful evening. Thank you, Mukti.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks, darling. Bye. Yes, your spiritual self is with you every moment of every day, and there's nothing that you need to do. It's right there. It is you. And today is your invitation to wake up and remember who you really are, to wake up and to live through the eyes of the divine, to wake up and be you. There's only one thing that you are here to do. and that is simply be who you really are. No one else can do it, only you. And if you're not going to do it, then who? It's your job to be yourself, your job to experience life as only you can experience life. And if your life is not quite the way you want it to be, well, maybe it's time to step back and start asking yourself a whole different set of questions. Because as the questions change, so will your answers. And as your answers change, so will your life. And then it's never too late. It's never too late. That your life and every day is a gift to you. And in any single moment of any day, everything can change. Everything is changing. Please visit me on my website at nanice.com. That's NANICE.com. I have tons of free show downloads. Another show with Mukti is right on that website as well. All the shows from Chai with Nanice and Gadaji are also on there. And there's tons of free articles, and there's free book downloads and 2 free song downloads. And while you're there, please email me. Let me know who you are and what you'd like to see on the show, or how a show has had an effect on you. I want to hear from you. And also, don't forget to take the pledge. Click on the pledge on the right side of the website, and it will help you to change your life and be the change that you want to see in the world. The power is within you. You have the power, and it's time to live and be who you really are. Until next week, you've been listening to Chai with Nanice. I'm Nanice. I love you. Bye for now.
Thank you for having Chai with Nanice. Please go to www.nanice.com for great free stuff that will empower you to live your best possible life. Free books, articles, shows, meditation audios, and so much more at nanice.com. That's NANICE.com. Nanice's books are also available in all major bookstores and Amazon. Check out The Infinite Power of You, Even Gandhi Got Hungry and Buddha Got Mad, Zest Point, Lip Prints, and many others by Nanice Ellis. To find out about one-on-one coaching and how Nanice can personally coach you to experience your best life possible, please email mybestlife@nanice.com.